For decades, one name stood as a symbol of strength in American driveways: GM, the Silverado, the Sierra, names that meant toughness, reliability, and pride. Fathers handed keys to sons, not just passing down a truck, but passing down a legacy. But in one shocking moment, GM's CEO shattered that legacy, confessing that nearly 900,000 trucks and SUVs carried defective engines that could lock up without warning. Imagine you're cruising down the highway with your kids in the back seat, the radio humming, and suddenly, silence. The steering stiffens, the brakes go dead, and 18-wheelers close in from behind. That isn't just a breakdown. That's terror, sold under the promise of dependability. When GM announced the recall, it wasn't just about engines. It was about betrayal. The company that once symbolized trust had just admitted to selling ticking time bombs. This wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was the collapse of faith between a brand and millions of loyal Americans. And yet, what came next was even worse. Because instead of fixing the problem, GM doubled down. When the news broke, truck owners expected accountability, full repairs, transparency, and respect. Instead, they got what mechanics called a joke of a fix. GM's solution to engines seizing at highway speeds: thicker oil, a new filler cap, and a printed insert for the owner's manual. That's right, a billion-dollar defect dressed up as a $50 oil change. To customers, it felt like an insult. These trucks were sold as the most dependable on the road, yet their fate rested on a bottle of 0W40 and a plastic cap. No redesigned engine, no replaced crankshafts, just a patch meant to stretch engines barely long enough to cross the warranty finish line. Owners reported worse fuel economy, sluggish performance, and the eerie feeling that their once proud trucks were now running on borrowed time. "This isn't a fix," one owner said. "It's a cover-up." GM called it an update, mechanics called it a band-aid on a bullet wound. But when drivers started shouting louder, someone finally listened. Not GM, but Washington. For years, owners filed complaints with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Reports of sudden engine seizures, trucks stalling mid-turns, or losing power in intersections. Many of those stories ended in crashes, injuries, or terrifying near misses. Dozens of official cases piled up. Hundreds of informal complaints followed. Yet, GM stayed silent until regulators forced their hand. By early 2025, Washington had seen enough. The NHTSA launched a formal investigation covering almost 900,000 vehicles, escalating from a small review into a full engineering analysis within months. The evidence was overwhelming: consistent failures, identical symptoms, and a timeline that pointed to one thing GM had known for years. They didn't come forward voluntarily. They were cornered. And when regulators dug deeper, they uncovered something chilling. This wasn't GM's first time gambling with customer trust. Flashback to 2022. GM had already faced a massive lawsuit over excessive oil consumption. Truck owners accused the automaker of installing defective piston rings that burned oil at alarming rates. Engineers had warned about it, but executives ignored them, approving a cheaper cleaning process instead of redesigning the part. The gamble worked. For a while, engines lasted just long enough to clear the warranty period before failing. But when the truth surfaced in court, GM was caught red-handed. Internal memos revealed that management knowingly took the risk. A jury sided with the owners, handing down hundreds of millions in damages. It was supposed to be a warning, a message that cutting corners comes at a price. But the message didn't stick, because only a few years later, the same company was caught repeating the same deception, just with different parts, higher stakes, and far more lives on the line. GM didn't stumble into this. They planned around it, and the deeper investigators looked, the more it seemed like these engines weren't just failing, they were built to fail. Modern engines are marvels of precision, every part measured within 1,000th of an inch. One wrong measurement, one microscopic flaw, and a disaster is inevitable. Inside GM's V8 engines, those flaws were everywhere. Tiny bits of debris left over from machining scraped away the delicate oil film meant to keep metal parts gliding smoothly. The result? Metal grinding against metal, bearings scarred, crankshafts destroyed, engines seizing before 30,000 miles. Families bought these trucks believing they'd last a lifetime, only to realize they'd bought mechanical time bombs. And here's what made it unforgivable. GM knew how to do it right. The Corvette's LT2 engine, built by the same company, uses forged rods, high-grade alloys, and a dry sump oil system that can survive race conditions. So why weren't those protections used in family trucks? The answer wasn't engineering, it was accounting. GM didn't forget how to build reliable V8s. They just decided it wasn't worth the cost. Behind closed doors, GM's executives treated safety like a spreadsheet. Engineers warned that replacing crankshafts would cost billions. Finance teams offered a cheaper fix: use thicker oil to delay failure past the warranty expiration. If engines collapsed after that, the cost shifted from GM to the customer. This wasn't speculation, it was strategy. In past lawsuits, internal documents literally debated whether to manage failures rather than repair them. So, when GM told owners to update their oil, they weren't fixing anything. They were buying time, enough to get past the warranty, enough to shift the blame. And every mile driven after that was a gamble, not by engineers, but by accountants. Balance sheets might have looked good for a quarter or two, but loyalty, that number plummeted. Families don't forget when a company treats their safety like a rounding error. Turn on the TV, and you'll still see commercials bragging about J.D. Power Awards and most dependable trophies, smiling actors, mountain roads, flashy slogans. But behind those ads, real families were stranded on the side of highways. Engines silent. Those trophies weren't earned. They were bought through perception. J.D. Power Awards measure things like infotainment glitches the same way they measure catastrophic engine failure. In their scoring, a frozen touchscreen counts just as much as a locked-up V8. So while GM plastered the airwaves with awards, mechanics were scraping metal debris from oil pans. The trophies looked shiny, but to truck owners, they meant nothing. Dependability isn't a commercial, it's a promise. And GM broke it. When GM announced the recall, dealerships across America were thrown into chaos. Service bays filled overnight with angry customers demanding answers. Sales staff froze, unable to sell inventory under stop sale orders. Brand new trucks sat gathering dust, and loyal buyers suddenly saw their dream vehicles as liabilities. The worst part? Even dealers were blindsided. Local mechanics and sales managers, people who built lifelong relationships with their communities, now had to defend a corporation that refused to defend them. They were told to read from scripts, perform oil swaps, and hand customers a cap as a fix. It was heartbreaking. These weren't just showrooms, they were hometown institutions. Now they were war zones between frustrated families and powerless employees. GM didn't just destroy trust with customers, they turned their own dealers into collateral damage. Once Washington stepped in, GM's nightmare truly began. The NHTSA's final reports confirmed what owners had been saying for years. The failures weren't accidents. They were the result of systemic defects in a specific production line. The lawsuits followed fast. Class action attorneys filed claims for engine replacements, lost income, diminished resale value, and even physical injuries from crashes caused by stalling. Each new case meant another wave of bad press, another dip in GM's stock price. Analysts warned investors that legal payouts could erase entire years of profit. For once, the courtroom was louder than the marketing department, and no slogan could save them now. Behind every broken truck was a factory worker forced to build something they no longer believed in. For decades, GM's assembly lines were a source of pride, blue-collar workers who took craftsmanship seriously. But after the scandal, many admitted they felt ashamed. Union reps revealed workers had voiced concerns about certain components years earlier and were ignored. Some even stopped telling friends what they worked on. Imagine being proud to build America's trucks, only to realize your company used your labor to deceive families. Now, unions are pushing back, arguing that ignoring defects isn't just bad for consumers, it's a betrayal of workers' integrity. GM didn't just break trust with drivers, they broke it with their own people. The financial collapse didn't stop in the boardroom. It hit home, literally. Used Silverado and Sierra values dropped thousands overnight. Trade-in offers evaporated. Insurance premiums climbed for affected models. Families who counted on their trucks as long-term assets suddenly watched them turn into liabilities. Small business owners, landscapers, contractors, haulers found themselves stuck with unreliable tools of the trade. In communities where pickups are a way of life, the emotional impact was just as heavy as the financial one. The truck that once symbolized hard work and pride now symbolized corporate betrayal. As GM scrambled for damage control, Ford and Toyota pounced. Ford launched trade-in campaigns for frustrated Silverado owners, cash incentives for switching to the F 150 lineup. Toyota rolled out reliability ads, reminding customers that trust isn't optional. Even as GM's reputation burned, competitors doubled down on innovation. Ford promoted its Lightning EV trucks, while Toyota teased hybrid powertrains combining toughness and efficiency. Every lost GM buyer wasn't just one sale gone. It was decades of brand loyalty gone. Pickup owners rarely switch brands, but this scandal broke that tradition wide open. For the first time in generations, families that grew up on GM were switching teams, and Ford and Toyota were waiting with open arms. When headlines caught fire, politicians followed the scent. Congress announced hearings, demanding answers from GM executives. Lawmakers accused the company of misleading consumers, questioning how long it knew about the defect before taking action. For politicians, it was the perfect storm. Angry voters, viral outrage, and a chance to grill corporate America under bright lights. Each hearing turned into a theater. Executives dodging questions, victims sharing emotional testimonies, and cameras flashing. The story stopped being about engines and started being about corporate arrogance. Every viral clip, every evasive answer deepened the damage. GM became a symbol, not of American strength, but of American greed. And once Congress gets involved, you don't just face recalls as you face history books. But this story isn't just about corporations and politicians. It's about people fighting back. Owners are organizing online, forming support groups, sharing VIN check tools, and uniting their voices. Each new complaint, each shared story, builds pressure that regulators can't ignore. They're learning how to protect themselves, keeping maintenance logs, demanding inspections, joining lawsuits, and they're realizing something powerful. When consumers unite, even a giant like GM can be forced to change. This isn't just about broken trucks. It's about accountability. It's about taking back control from companies that think loyalty is guaranteed. For a century, GM's trucks stood for dependability. For families across America, they were more than machines. They were memories, milestones, and promises. But that promise is gone. The recall wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was a moral failure. Now, GM faces something far more dangerous than lawsuits. A generation of buyers who will never forget. The road ahead for the company is uncertain, but one thing is clear. You can rebuild engines, but you can't rebuild trust once it's destroyed. So if you've ever believed a brand was too big to fail, think again. Because when loyalty dies, even giants fall. And this fall, it's happening in real time. Subscribe now, because the next revelation might be parked in your own driveway.